Hey, everybody. Welcome to Alumless. Thank you for joining us for this edition. It is great to see you, Kris. Thank you for being here as always.
What's hard, Ryan,
Alumless.
is that you and I see each other multiple times a day, and we
I
have to
know we were
pretend
just
like
on
we
a
haven't seen
call the
each
last
other.
couple times today already. So it's nice to see you is, overstating it, I guess, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm done with you, Ryan. Let's keep going.
yeah, right. Uh, Alumless is a CMAC production. On the show, we talk about engagement strategies in university advancement. We have an awesome show today. We have Kris Davitt, who is the Senior Vice Chancellor for Advancement at the University of Pittsburgh, joining us. It's going to be fantastic. Kris has his patented, I don't know, what do we call it? Listeners, Kris has a pennant behind him for Pitt, and he changes the pennant for every client that he works with, which is a pretty amazing. Have you ever messed it up, Kris, and you had a different pennant flying behind you?
Yeah, and I got grief for it for months afterwards because it was a rival school I had up to. It's a bad
Like,
mistake.
I can see it going wrong every once
Yeah,
in a while, right? It goes right most of the time, and it's a
mhm,
nice touch. I got to
yep.
hand it to you.
Thank
I
you.
keep the drab extra room background going,
It's a very
weird
good look.
fake plant, guitar that I rarely play. Yeah, anyway. Well, we're broadcasting not live today. We have pre-recorded this episode, but we're glad you're joining us. We are on the road today, although we're hoping to chime in while we're at the University of Denver when this episode drops. So we are going to have a great show today. Before we get too far down the road, I want to make sure to introduce our sponsoring partner, which is, of course, Protopia. We, as engagement pros, are always thinking about how to create more volunteering opportunities. Why is that? The reason is the big one is that volunteers give at 2 or even 3 times the rate. This is important, particularly for those alumni leaders working in integrated advancement models. We're trying to create a pipeline of donors. At the same time, students throughout their educational journey have questions and could use the advice of alumni. As engagement pros, we're asked to figure out ways to make the alumni network available from prospective student to former student and develop partnerships across campus that will showcase in real terms how valuable the alumni network can be. That's what Protopia solves for. Without requiring alumni or students to sign up for another app or platform, Protopia's AI-powered technology activates alumni and turns them into volunteers in a flash. Students and alumni seeking advice are connected while removing the administrative burden of the staff. Protopia is the tool that you've been looking for. Visit protopia.co/alumless and be sure to mention that Ryan and Kris sent you. All right. Protopia it is. Actually, and Pitt is a Protopia customer, one of the original customers, which is fantastic. So, Kris, let's get our conversation started today. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your time at Lehigh and or Cornell University. Did you ever experience a major leadership change during either of those tenures? And what were the implications of those? How did you handle it? What was it that you went through? And how did you try to guide your team through those changes?
Uh, yes, at Lehigh. No, at Cornell. I was there for 5 years, so it was pretty stable during that time. But at Lehigh, we had a change in presidential leadership, and my position at the time reported to the president. It was one of the few alumni positions in the country that had that direct line, and so I sat at the leadership table for the university, and I was hired by a president named Greg Farrington, who left, and an interim came in, a former board chair, and then a new president was named. And it was a year later, I left to go to Cornell. So I'm not going to connect all the dots in there, but the point I'm making is it was a rough go given the changes that were happening in the direction of the institution. Managed it fine. And my goal as the leader was to try to keep it away from my staff. So as much as possible, shield them from all the turmoil that was going on at that level behind the curtain. So they're interesting moments. I'm really looking forward to talking to Kris about some of what she's experienced in her career in the same category. But there are times when it goes smoothly too. And I think some of that, we'll find out from Kris. She's going to tell us how it went at Pitt.
Yeah, and as consultants, we often get hired during moments of transition, right? Maybe an alumni leader has just been hired, maybe one has just left, and there is an interim leader in place. I think at this moment in time, you're covering, to keep things continuity going at a couple different schools,
Yeah.
so how do you help provide that type of stability? Like, what do you do when you're in those interim roles, or help kind of during these periods of transition?
I stabilize, find some continuity, sort of calm things down. But there are times where it lasts long enough, or your remit from a vice president or even a president sometimes is to find out what's wrong as quickly as you can and start making changes. And those are the fun ones where you actually get in. The thing I like about it is that you actually feel like you're a member of a staff team again. You're with people who like work with you every day on the same problems. And so most of the time it's stabilize and provide some continuity in leadership, and then to make those assessments as you go and make changes if there's enough time to do so. That's the part I like best, where you have really a good chance to sort of change the course. It's like doing an assessment like we do, Ryan, all the time, where we write up the report, but now you're doing it real time and you're making those changes as you're there live, literally making those, organizational changes or programmatic changes, and you sort of see the report come to life in front of you. That's how I would describe it.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting work. And I actually think, of all the things that we do to help clients, that sort of longer term interim type of coaching and helping stabilize programs is the most interesting, because not only are you making those decisions in real time, you're also developing a much more important rapport with the staff and the other leaders, the volunteers as well. You're not just interviewing them once, right? You're really sort of engaged in a building process with the team as it is. All right, well, we're going to have a great conversation here. Let's bring out to the show Kris Davitt. Hey, Kris, how are you?
Hello, nice to see you both.
We're glad to have you. Kris is the Senior Vice Chancellor for Philanthropic and Alumni Engagement at the University of Pittsburgh, and she is also the Chief Development Officer for Pitt's academic medical partner, UPMC. So you have a much larger, even larger role than the one that I said off the top of the show. How is that even possible? How do you manage all of these important roles?
Well, it actually, like, if we kind of talk about the reorg that I ended up implementing, it all kind of makes sense. We work very closely with UPMC, and it's mostly with our clinical faculty who have dual appointments, both as practitioners and clinicians, and also as researchers and faculty. So largely it's figuring out a more systematic way to support them rather than having, a lot of different people knocking on the same doors. But it's sort of, I think it leans into the complexity of our organizations by simply acknowledging that it's complex and allowing me to hopefully make some sense of it. Depends on the day, but definitely making some sense of it.
How big is that universe in terms of FTEs? How many people?
About 280 FTEs directly. And then you go beyond that when you look at the regional hospitals and other things.
So folks on the call listening to us, Kris has 280 direct reports is what this boils down to.
Yes.
That's a lot of reviews to write.
Sweet heavens. Yes.
Touched a nerve there. Well, Kris, Marshall shared with me, Kris Davitt, that, that back when you first started, not too long after that, there was a major leadership change. The chancellor stepped down while you were planning the campaign, which you, of course, are now in, right?
Quite.
Not quite. Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
We're still in that interim period. Yeah.
Still in that fun, quiet, not so quiet period where everyone's talking about it, but it's not public. I got it. And so, but how did that change shake things up? How did you kind of keep things stable and then forge ahead?
Yeah, I'm going to quote some of what Kris said about sort of being part of the team. But so when Chancellor Gallagher decided to step down, I would say it was surprising, but I think as you look at it, it was part of the wave of a lot of university presidents and chancellors who had gotten through COVID and other challenges. And I think, it sort of fit better, but it was surprising because we were coming out of COVID and really felt we were, with the help of Kris and others, in a good position to kind of have that, that noisy, quiet phase of a campaign. And so it was put on pause. I think from, I was leading a staff that had been through a lot of change. My role was a new role, but there had been interim leadership in the advancement function for almost 2 years. And then I come in, and then the chancellor changes and the head of UPMC had changed. And so from a staff perspective, I just tried to be very communicative about, we are doing all the right things. This is who we serve. This is our mission. We already have the receipts that we're headed in the right direction. So we're going to continue to do work. I communicated as much as I could about the search process. And I always preface this kind of information sharing by saying, I'm going to try to remove as much of the uncertainty you have about X topic. Now, by sharing this information, I will be creating new uncertainty. Like, let's just have that as the baseline.
Right.
But the certainty will be, I will continue to tell you what I know. And that included how I was able to contribute to the search, both before it was live and when it was live. I didn't share anything about the finalist interviews, but I did share that I was interviewing them because I wanted the team to know that I had a seat at that table. I was not a decision maker, but I was able to share what our roles were. And so I think that helped. On the advancement side, we decided to do, and it's kind of very quiet, sort of a campaign dress rehearsal, which we're informally calling Meet the Challenge, all about student support. Because one of the things that came up in our readiness assessment was that every dean, every director, they all agreed that creating more support for student success was shared. And you know, as I joked, I could not imagine a new chancellor coming in and saying, how dare you secure new gifts for students? That has nothing to do with the way I'm going to run this school. So we've done a lot of work. And what that really has to do is both empowering the staff, but also helping to support our deans who are, a number of them are fairly new. So we're kind of in the midst of this. Chancellor Gable started about 80 days ago, Joan Gable, and she is already, you know, ready to go in campaign planning. So that this interim period is going to be shorter than I expected, but that's kind of how we tried to piece it together.
That makes sense. But you arrived at Pitt in 2017, and you led an extensive restructuring of the fundraising and engagement efforts there. What did that realignment entail, and why was it important to shift things around at that time?
Yeah, so I did come in this new role with this dual report to the chancellor of the university and the CEO and president of UPMC. And basically what was happening is there was health sciences fundraising happening, and there was provost school, so not the health sciences schools, and then athletics, but then the cancer center, and then, you know, various other things. And so with our top donors, it was sort of death by 1,000 blows, right? You might be asked by multiple people for multiple gifts without any recognition of what your overall interests were, and really nobody creating a comprehensive vision for what you could do. The other thing is that Pitt is so fortunate to be in Pittsburgh because we have incredible foundation support and leadership here. But that had also become a really wonderful way to not take advantage of individual fundraising opportunity. And so the over-reliance on our foundation partners in particular, and I always want to say, I am grateful for every single gift, and particularly for the relationships that we have with our faculty have, and we have as advancement staff. But we have 350,000 alumni and an unending pool of grateful patients. And we were not optimizing that. So I sort of threw it all up in the air, got rid of the various silos, created one integrated department with core, you know, centers of excellence, whether it's research, donor relations, corporate and foundation relations, communications. We created a principal gift function, which we really didn't have in as resourced a way as we do now. And then identified individual giving for the health sciences and for what we call schools and centers. And then beyond that, there are sort of the universe. Athletics is in there, international advancement, regional campuses, volunteer management. So the goal is you have this core, but you have the flexibility to scale it up or scale it down depending on who you were trying to serve. So when the dean of the Dietrich School of Arts and Sciences decides she wants to sort of launch her own fundraising initiative a couple of years ago, we were able to create a campaign called if you're from New England, you're not going to love this name, but it really did work. The Big Dig with Dietrich Inspirational Giving. And I kept saying, but I'm from Rhode Island, and you need to know that the Big Dig and the Boston,
all the Boston people just gasped.
Not great, but it actually, it became such a talking point, and the volunteers bought into it. So they started out with a goal of $12 million. They just wrapped it up with $28 million. So long story short, some of it was just reorganizing, but some of it was creating culture, right? We didn't have a lot of the basic processes to make it clear who manages prospects. And there had been a lot of turnover. And so some of it, part of the reorg, similar to what I said about the chancellor transition, was an opportunity to communicate, to listen, to share what I observed, what I thought the challenges were, and to kind of get buy-in. So it was about almost a year process. But I think we ended up doing, I think it's proven to be the right thing.
When you throw all those pieces up in the air, you said it took a year. Did it settle before the pandemic, or were you still, okay, well, that's a big win.
Thank goodness. I know I keep doing this, and this is the whole thing you're going to see me. It's a big shoe emoji. We were pretty much, we announced it. It was even less than a year. We announced it in the summer of 2018. And some of that was a little bit of a wing and a prayer, but I just felt like I was going to start running out of runway. I needed to just start doing. And, I have an alum who has this great phrase that he wants a good do-say ratio. Do you do more than you say? And I needed to do. And so, we were fortunately well in hand.
You're going to have people listening to this, watching this, that have similar types of roles or will be moving to those roles. Do you give that advice of the do and say balance, or is it depend on the situation?
I think it depends on the situation, because what I would say is, I think the mistake I made was I underestimated, or I guess I overestimated the community, not my staff, but the broader university community's understanding of how complicated fundraising is and how many things have to be right. So part of it was I decided I just had to do something because that was evidence that I was doing something.
Yeah, right.
But I think, Kris, you've heard me say this, but I had a couple of tough conversations where I said, you brought me in to build a supercar, and building the engine is what we need to do. And that takes a lot of time and expertise. If you want me to keep repainting the exterior so you think the car is new, I'll do it, but it won't run any better. But that only bought me so much patience.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah. The other one I used at one point was, you want me to keep redecorating the penthouse, but the rest of the structure is on fire.
Right.
So I became alarmist in some points, but it did work out, and it was mostly to the team of like, this is what we're doing, and we're committed to this.
Yeah. But it's implied, I think, in a do and say like model you just described. But there's a listen phase too, where you take time to sort of get that input, and eventually you got to do. I totally agree with you in that. So
and it's interesting what you hear, because sometimes what you hear is that people don't want to tell you, right? And that's when I knew we had some morale challenges.
Yeah.
And so some of it was just being very visible and showing up. And so, some of it was, and also being able to say, I am totally hearing you that this is frustrating. That's not going to get fixed this time. And let me help you understand why. I just had to double down on candor, but I wasn't going to make promises I couldn't deliver.
Yep. Good for you. I want to go back on script. Sorry about that. But that was my favorite way of talking with you, Kris, when we get you off script. So.
Oh, it's dangerous. It's dangerous.
But let me shift to alumni engagement. Full disclosure, I'm completely biased in your particular alumni leader because she's a dear friend and someone who I worked with back at Lehigh, and Nancy Merritt. But when you think of where you're headed and the role of alumni engagement in the reorganization that you're having, but ultimately as you're heading to a campaign, where do you see the role of alumni engagement playing in that campaign?
Yeah, it's critical. Although I just want to take a step back on the Nancy Merritt fan club, because when I interviewed with her, I've never done this, but I said to her, oh my God, I just have to figure out how to hire you, like halfway through the interview. So
in the meeting with her, right?
Yeah, all of my negotiating and leverage is like right out the door. But
she called me after that meeting, and I told her to go. I said, throw a big number out. She's throwing.
Thanks, Kris.
Yeah, you bet.
She would be worth it. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the, I think alumni engagement is a value in and of itself. Full stop. Do I hope it will lead to more money being raised? Of course.
Yeah.
But I think any campaign, and even before you have a campaign, any investment in alumni engagement, you have to hold that as a value that is a value in and of itself. It's a little bit like, you hear these arguments about teaching music to kids, and it's like, well, it'll help their math. It's like, no, you should teach music because it's good for them.
Right.
Like, it's great that there are these other benefits. So I think we're really fortunate too, in our, the Pitt Alumni Association leadership is all in, right? They've created a great strategic plan with Nancy and her team. And so it's very easy to talk about the value of engagement, whether they're hiring, whether they're ambassadors, whether they're buying season tickets, whether they're mentoring, they're showing up, all of those things. And then I think when we get into a campaign, this is where you actually make it tangible. Like, what does it mean to be an engaged alum? And how do we want to measure that? And how do we want the chancellor to be able to say, and Kris, I'm stealing this right from you. There are two things we're going to be able to say we've done in this campaign. With the first one being how alumni have participated. One, that's a great message, right? And two, it gets away from this whole, you only come and talk to me when you need money.
Right, exactly.
But so I see them as really hand in glove. But even without a campaign, our focus on the Pitt Alumni Association is 100% because it is a value in and of itself.
Yep. I'll switch back to your previous experience. So you've had time at University of Pennsylvania and at Brown, two elite private universities. You're now at an elite public institution. Talk do a little compare and contrast. What are the biggest differences? What are some of the things that feel the same? Anything unique about a public versus, I'm sure there are, but fire away. Give us some compare and contrast.
Yeah, it's been so interesting because they're all different.
Yeah.
But, obviously it's not an easy time for higher ed as far as the public discourse, but particularly for public universities, right? Like, I haven't seen a lot of complaining about the tuition rates at private schools. I mean, there is, but when it becomes to schools that get public funding, that sort of discussion of what is ROI is pretty real, right? And is valid. Like, if you're taking taxpayers' money, you need to be able to be accountable for that. And so that's a different gear than I was used to dealing with at the other two schools. And I also have found that, and I don't know if this is because of the history of public funding or just how the mission started, but Pitt's history of giving is sort of lower key than, if you're at an Ivy League, the donor participation rates are really high. And there's a longer tradition of giving because they've relied on it for longer. And so I think for me, it was really figuring out where we were on that donor affinity stage. We came up with some statistics really early on that not only were our major and principal gift donors giving at significantly less than their capacity rating, but we were asking them.
I remember that moment we talked about that.
That's the one that sort of hurts my heart.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know what that comes from, but just figuring out that not only should we ask their capacity, but our students and our faculty and our researchers, they deserve it. And so do the donors. Like, they deserve a vision for how they can contribute. And so I think we're just a little further back. Starters blocks are a little bit further back. But having said that, I think the mission of public universities is great. Like, I've loved every place I've worked. I've never worked at any place I was ashamed to ask for money, But, a large public university with its mandate to serve is pretty exciting. Particularly those days you're maybe not having the best day, but you can look up and you could be like, okay, but, I need to get working here because this is important.
That it's almost like there's what was in place, and I know you're working on changing this, but there's like this blue collar humility to what we can ask for as a public institution. Yet the capacities were showing us more. Have you shed that burden from your staff? Do they feel freer to be more targeted and higher in their asking? Are we still dealing with some of the old way? Put it that way.
Well, I think so. I mean, Chancellor Gable is very focused on putting together those pride points, really, and sort of like what should we talk about? And let me just say, I'm also at a school that has a big time athletics program, and while people want to complain here or there about the sports, that is something where we're very visible and, get very excited about. I think in the team, we do know how to dream bigger. We just recently closed a $25 million gift for the Department of Orthopedic Surgery. And it's a grateful patient gift. The surgeon is an incredible partner. The chair of orthopedic surgery has been great. The dean of the School of Medicine has been great. But it all started with a fundraiser who, did the work with the grateful patient over 7 years, including the first gift of $1,000. So he kind of presented that case and pointed at all the departments. I mean, the hundreds of people who had something to do with how this worked out. And I think that's how we try to tell the story with the team. Like, guess what? Like, we can do these things, and here's evidence.
But if you take out some of those partnerships and you go back to the mentality you were in before, that gift, instead of being 25, might have been $5 million. It still would have been a big gift, but
that's right.
5 times. I mean,
we still deal with the people who, and I talked to the surgeon, and he's like, you'd be amazed at how many people think that I asked for this gift yesterday. Like when he talks about the amount of time so there's still that gap. I think there's the gap sometimes of people who just assume because they have a great idea, somebody should give them a ton of money. But I do think we're changing that. And I think Chancellor Gable has that very high aspiration.
That's great. All right, Ryan, I'll let you go back on script.
No, that's okay. We had a couple of minutes here in the live portion of the show, and I wanted to ask, and then we can carry some of the questions we didn't get to in the front half to the second half. But Kris, I wanted to ask you about your leadership style. Kris says that you're one of the funniest people he's ever met, and I guess I wanted to ask you,
I think he means sarcastic.
I don't know. But
entertainingly funny in calls. I have a list of Davidisms that I've kept along the years here. So
he promoted our last show by talking about Davidisms. And so I guess I was just wondering, is there some intentionality around your use of sarcasm or humor, or how do you describe your leadership style?
Well, there's trying to be funny. Like, I am the middle of 3 daughters in an Irish family. So like we get to the funny pretty quickly, no matter what the situation is. I do find humor funny in tense situations. And I think the further you get up in the leadership, my willingness to crack a joke, hopefully appropriately, I think does kind of take tension out if people are feeling stressed. The challenge with hiring and retaining smart, talented, ambitious, caring people is sometimes like that work feels hard to them, right? So it's important that I think help everybody not take themselves too seriously. I have to say, I really try to be very approachable and honest. I'll never forget meeting John Zeller, who was my boss at Penn, when I came for an interview, and we walked into the building and he knew everybody's name. Didn't matter who they were, what they did. And I don't think that's an act, right? I think that is a genuinely nice person making an effort to know people because he values what they do. And so that kind of leadership, I've learned from people like that. And I think what I try to do is, it's all about sort of being an advocate for talent, right? Like, I need to make sure people have the resources they need, remove obstacles, advocate, and correct when needed, but hopefully constructively. Like, we're always learning, right? And I think lastly, I've talked about that gift. If that gift had not closed, there was still so much to celebrate on about how the team conducted themselves, right? So it's not just what we accomplish, but I try to remark on how it's done so that people understand that the way you just can't be a jerk. You can close a lot of gifts, and really, if you're a terrible person, like that's not a win. And it's certainly not a long-term win. So, whether it's, the alumni relations or the events team who are just making sure every guest feels welcome, or it's knowing that all our endowed fund reports got out like beautifully 2 weeks ahead of schedule, like that stuff matters. And so I just try to be appreciative.
Awesome. Well, we will hold there our conversation, and please, listeners, be sure to pick up the podcast edition of Alumless. You can find anywhere you find podcasts, and listen to our bonus conversation with Kris Davitt, where we'll cover lots of territory. And Kris, before we depart, who is our guest in 2 weeks?
Someone Kris Davitt knows well is Carla Willis from Washburn McGoldrick. She's a colleague of ours. She was on a project that we did a lot of work with Pitt. But Carla has been recently named a principal at Washburn McGoldrick. We're really excited about that. Yeah. And she well-deserved, and she's just got a great way about her. She's super smart. She has been a lot of really cool experiences, and we're going to have Carla, a colleague of ours, on in the next session.
Awesome. Well, thank you for our presenting sponsor, Protopia, for making Alumless happen. And do be sure to pick up the podcast edition. For Kris Davitt and Chris Marshall, I'm Ryan. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks.